The Hall of Gods allows the player to refight bosses on 3 different difficulty modes: Attuned, Ascended, and Radiant. Radiant is the hardest and basically involves the player getting obliterated by every single attack. As you can imagine, this changes which bosses are the hardest quite a bit. The hardest bosses in Radiant mode are the ones which are the hardest to dodge because of their mechanics, whereas normally the hardest bosses are just defined by high health, damage, or attack speed. For this reason, I thought it would be interesting if I made a top 10 hardest bosses list specifically based on how difficult they are in Radiant mode. The 10th hardest Radiant boss is the Oblobles, which is normally a very easy fight when you can just spam them down with shrieks, but gets much harder when you can't get hit. During the first phase, if the Oblobles are able to encircle you, it can feel almost impossible to dodge everything. Fortunately for everyone's sanity, you can hit the right Oblobble at the start of the fight, which will always make it go left. Then you can keep the Oblobles to one side of you using spells and nail arts. It's still a difficult fight though, because you have to make sure you don't get cornered in both phases. Nightmare King Grim is still one of the hardest bosses in Radiant mode due to how much health he has, not to mention the fact that he attacks very quickly and has a pretty big move pool. His attacks on their own are also pretty hard to dodge, but that does kind of segue into the reason why he's only the 9th hardest, the reason being you only need to worry about dodging each attack alone. For a lot of other bosses, their attacks can combine together, and also you need to worry about your positioning after dodging each attack. By contrast, Nightmare King Grim gives you enough time between attacks to charge up a nail art and or move back to the center. The Pure Vessel is a lot like Nightmare King Grim in terms of how predictable it is, but it's harder since it doesn't have the pause in between attacks. This means that for certain combinations, if you use the Shade Cloak to dodge one attack, it won't refresh in time to dodge the next. A lot of players, myself included, use the ground dash strategy to beat it normally, but because of this, you basically have to switch to jumping on Radiant. Fly is yet another boss that's basically here due to his health and attack speed, but the difference between him and the previous two is the fact that he attacks way faster even than them. Another unique challenge with Sly is you have to figure out where it's safe to stand, and reading his hitboxes can often be pretty tricky. This is also true in the second phase, where his Circle of Doom has about the same radius as your nail's leg. I find the safest way to deal with it is to use nail arts, since they have such huge hitboxes. You should also probably jump so that the widest part of your nail art is lined up with Sly's vertical height. The White Defender throws a lot of curveballs, literally and figuratively. I'm not quite sure why this boss is so hard, but I guess it's just super easy to overthink. Preemptive Descending Darks are great against both the Poop Toss attack and the start of phase 2. Otherwise, it can be super easy to dash when you're not supposed to and end up with him coming out under you. Of course, there's also the juggle strategy, but that relies on him giving you 3 pieces of poop as well as the short bounce, and it's not even that easy. No Ice is an extremely uncomfortable boss because all of your movement, both in terms of repositioning and attacking, has to be guided by the patterns of the ghosts. It's actually really hard to give tips for this fight since so much of it depends on how well you understand those patterns, but generally speaking I'd recommend sticking to the middle 2 platforms as well as avoiding moving from the bottom left to the bottom right platform. And now we have Markoth, if only there was a floor. The fight's one saving grace is the fact that he's pretty bad at restricting your movement. Make use of this and stay out of harm's way. If attacking doesn't look safe, it probably means it isn't safe. For example, if he's on the other side of the center from you and he's below the top platforms, it probably means he's not safe to attack except with dash slashes. And if he's below the bottom platforms, just don't attack him, period. Also, the most common mistake I see people making is using the Great Slash too late. You have to use the Great Slash before he's in range. If you wait until he's in range, you risk getting hit by the shield. If you do it too early and he escapes, it's no problem. You just don't get hit, he doesn't get hit, it doesn't matter. But again, if you do it too late, you get punished. Call this a hot take, but I think Galien is actually the hardest Dream Warrior. Admittedly, 90% of the fight comes down to understanding how the bounce mechanics on the big saw blade work. But unlike Markoth, your vertical movement is heavily restricted. In fact, sometimes even going up to begin the D-Dark animation is enough to get hit. In the last phase, when there's 3 saw blades flying around, not to mention Galien himself trying to corner you, it's actually the most uncomfortable fight in the entire game. What keeps him down at 3rd is the fact that he only shows you his truly awful combinations about 30% of the time, not to mention even then he normally dies fast enough that it's not a problem. But if you were to give Galeon twice as much health, he would definitely be my vote for the hardest Radiant boss. I don't think anyone's going to be surprised by these last two because Zote is annoying even when he can't one-shot you. I know the most diehard Zote fans will defend the fight by saying that technically nothing in it is random, and while they're technically correct, they're definitely wrong because the fight crosses a line that no boss should by about a mile. If I were to try to give tips for everything, this video would be like 20 minutes long. But generally speaking, the best way to win is to use a ton of preemptive Descending Darks. Their hitbox is also great at taking out the minions. At that point, the hardest part becomes learning how to not get clipped during the Descending Dark windup. The Absolute Radiance is unironically the most obnoxious boss basically no matter what you're doing. It has no less than 6 phases, and while fortunately most of them aren't too hard, the spike floor and platform phases are cancer. One tip that really helps for the spike floor phase is the fact that the Descending Dark can actually get rid of the spikes temporarily. This is super useful if the Absolute Radiance's teleportation pattern is constantly putting her above the spikes. The platform phase is even more obnoxious, and I'd recommend just not attacking if she's not either in the center or on the platforms right next to the center. Also, do yourself a giant favor in every phase and always dodge the wall attacks before they reach the halfway point, because if they do, that means she can start another attack and then they'll loop together and sometimes be almost impossible to dodge. That was my list of the top 10 hardest Radiant bosses. Let me know if you agreed or disagreed, and also let me know what your list would be in the comments. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching.